This is Sales Players, and I'm your host, Jesse Woodbury. I've spent my career selling for early stage companies, and now I'm on a mission to help reps, founders, operators find tips, strategies, and resources for generating more pipeline, closing more deals, and building wealth in tech sales. To learn more, visit salesplayers.co. What's up, everyone? Jesse here, and this is just a short episode geared towards anyone out there who's looking for their next opportunity in tech sales. It is a jungle out there. Honestly, the market is insane. And I'm not speaking just about the macro economy, but also the tech market. And it has been for a while. It's felt like it's been at least 18 months, probably more, of just sluggish growth in tech, especially on the hiring front. Then you also have this whole topic of AI and doing more with less, and companies trying to reach their break even or their profitability points. And so they're hiring less. And it's made for a very competitive space for anyone out there who's interviewing for their next role. And this is whether you're interviewing for an entry-level sales role or even a leadership role and anything in between. It's really tough out there. And I know this from firsthand experience because I recently changed roles, but I've also worked with a ton of coaching clients over the last several months, and we've had to go above and beyond to help them secure the roles that they were able to get into. And so I want to just talk about some ideas in this episode to help you if you are out there looking for your next opportunity, how you can stand out a little bit more in the interview process, and how you can make sure you manage that process as tightly as possible so that you can secure the role you're going out for. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on in tech sales and tech sales hiring. So what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing in the marketplace is sales leaders are under a lot of pressure right now. They can't just bring any old rep on board. Whereas a few years ago, as long as you had a pulse and you could speak well enough, they'd bring you in, and companies were hiring teams of, 10, 20, 30 or more account executives, SDR teams even bigger than that. And there was just a lot of headcount to go around. And there was not as much scrutiny around the interview process because there was just tons of open roles. There was more roles than there were people that could do those roles. And so it made for a really awesome situation. Definitely an employee market where negotiation was a lot easier on the compensation front, and the interview process itself was just a little less stressful and a little more straightforward. And then what you're seeing now is these hiring managers are adding rounds to every interview cycle. It's not just that you have to meet with the hiring manager and maybe a VP level, but now you've got to meet with someone at the C level or even a founder if you're going into a startup. And I'm also even aware of interview processes now that are involving the investors. The board members are actually wanting to interview sales candidates before a hiring manager says yes to anybody. That's a lot. And that's not something that I've seen up until very recently. And it can get really overwhelming if you're out there. It might feel hyper competitive, and it is. You're not crazy. It really is an insanely competitive environment out there for sellers. So yeah, let's also talk about what I'm hearing from other execs and hiring managers in the space, not just from conversations I've had with my network, but also in working with my coaching clients, what they're hearing from their hiring managers or from the execs in the roles they're going out for. One theme that I've heard a lot is sales executive leadership is they're not wanting to interview people that can tell stories anymore. They don't want to just have you show up to an interview and talk about all the cool things you've done in your career and all the deals you've closed and all your attainment percentages. Of course, you need to have those ready to go, but a lot of these leaders want you to actually show your work. And what do I mean by that? Well, they don't, again, want you to just show up to an interview, especially with someone who's like a vice president of sales or a CRO, or, God forbid you show up to a founder or investor interview and just sit and talk for 45 minutes or more about your achievements. That's not going to cut it anymore. It might have cut it a few years ago, but the situation's changed and it's time to get more prepared. So here's a few things that I've coached my clients on and I've done myself to stand out in the interview process and show my work, not just talk about what I've done, but actually show that I have a process, that it's something that can be implemented anywhere, and it's something that I can scale based on my prior experience and my prior attainment percentages and those sorts of things. So I'll just go through a couple of ideas here. One of those is to start building a highlight reel. I've talked about this before on the show. I've talked about it in my newsletter, but if you haven't, you need to start building a highlight reel of your career achievements. And that's not just bullet points that say 110% attainment last year, 200% attainment in 2018. It has to go beyond that. I actually personally have screenshots. I have screenshots of Slack updates that show deals I've closed or deal announcements, win reports, those sorts of things. I have a few pictures that I use, which is kind of a unique way to show something during the interview that shows my work. Is I have a picture of me winning Rep of the Quarter awards, or me winning, Rookie of the Year awards and those sorts of things. So I actually have photo evidence of my achievement and my attainment beyond just, a couple of bullet points in my resume. I have screenshots of dashboards within some of my systems. Be really careful here because you don't want to expose any private information about your company, but as best as you can, any proof without, disclosing specific details around your deals or the customers you worked with, if you can provide some proof and maybe take a picture. If you want a trophy or something for being Rep of the Year, Rep of the Quarter, take a picture of the trophy and put it in a slide deck. And when you talk to this VP of sales or a CRO who's interviewing you for a new role, pull that picture up and show that person that you've actually done what you said you did. Give them some proof that you're the real deal. So highlight reels. I always outline projects managed. And again, you don't want to necessarily disclose specific clients or deal sizes. You can give ranges. You can give, vague details. For example, I always say that I closed a deal with a large consumer brand, or I closed a deal with a large B2B software company. You can give industry, hints, but if you don't want to disclose the specific logos that you've done business with, totally understandable. You can even go into, costs saved, ROI delivered, pipeline generated. These are all things that you can put into your highlight reel. And as best as you can, try to take some screenshots, try to document this stuff elsewhere, and keep that as an ongoing thing. So I actually have a personal G drive that I use. It's the one I use for my @jessewoodbury.com email. And in that drive, I keep, different resources that I've put together, screenshots and evidence of my achievement beyond just me saying it. So that's what I mean by showing your work, is build a highlight reel and be ready to present that. Actually pull that up in your interview process and show these sales executive leaders who you're interviewing with that you know what you're talking about and that you have proof beyond just your word, or even, the word of a reference or something like that. So that's one idea. Make a highlight reel. Something I recommend to my coaching clients is to actually build a 90-day plan. I know this can be a slippery slope, and there's a lot of people out there in LinkedIn land who don't think this is a good idea, but it's always worked for me. You have to be careful not to give too much before you're on board at the company. That's the only disclaimer I would put around a 90-day plan. You don't want to start doing the job too much before you're on the payroll, but I think a 90-day plan can give your hiring manager or your executives at the company you're interviewing at some insight into your process, what you think about, how you set goals, how you manage your territory or your account planning, how you manage prospecting, what your process is for managing deal cycles, those sorts of things. So I have actually a deck template. And if you're interested in connecting with me for one-on-one coaching, I'd be happy to help you build that same deck for your role. So when you're going to interview, you have something to pull up during that interview on Zoom or in person, doesn't matter. Pull that deck up and actually showcase the things that your operating process, what your plan is for your first 90 days in office. I think it's super important to do that. This will also show a level of executive presence, which is something I've been talking about a lot in my newsletter. And that's your ability to put together creative assets and resources to then showcase and deliver a presentation with visuals to someone. It's going to show that you know what you're talking about, because this is the same skill that it takes to close enterprise deals, is being able to build slides and resources and creative assets that can be left behind with your buyers so they can share those internally and forward those on. It's super powerful and it's 100% effective. I know this because over the course of doing my coaching, I've never not had someone land the role they were going out for. So you just got to keep going and keep putting it out there. But that's the 90-day plan. And yeah, reach out. My email is jesse@salesplayers.co, or find me on LinkedIn. Shoot me a note on LinkedIn and I can work with you on a 90-day plan for your next role. And by the way, this might sound really daunting and it might sound like something that only execs have to do, but I'm telling you that it's very effective as an account executive or even an SDR to put together a brief, call it 10-slide plan that shows what you intend to do in your first 90 days in the role. Super powerful stuff. So highlight reels, 90-day plan, any other resources that you can show versus just tell. That's probably my biggest recommendation for anyone interviewing right now is you have to stand out. You have to be different than everyone else who you're interviewing against. And you've got to show that you have some executive presence. And executive presence goes far beyond just your speaking ability and your ability to deliver a presentation and manage stakeholders. Those are all part of it. But it's also just showing that you're self-aware, that you realize that you're coming into an organization as another, spoke in the hub, and that you want to be accretive, I believe is the word, accretive to the growth of the company. You want to enhance and be a force multiplier to the team. And so a very powerful way to do that is to start to build that highlight reel and, some resources that you can then PDF and send along as part of your thank you note to these executives who you're interviewing with, because that's also very powerful. They can forward that on to someone. They can review it later. It also opens you up to asking for feedback in a really natural way. Because when I'm delivering my 90-day plans in a hiring cycle, I'll ask, hey, look, I made some assumptions about the business. Are these fair assumptions based on what we know? And that shows a lot of EQ or, sort of self-awareness as a candidate, and it's super powerful. So one other piece of advice is I've got a list of questions that I always ask. And questions are so important because they show intellectual curiosity. And this is something that's come up over and over again, is the importance of curious sales reps. Because if you want to be great in business, you've got to be intellectually curious, and you want to really try to seek to understand, how do your clients make business decisions? How do prospects manage their paperwork, right? How does the company grow? How do we hit the targets that we're trying to hit? Intellectual curiosity is one of the most important skills, alongside empathy, self-awareness, and many other things. But being able to ask good questions shows your curiosity, or shows how curious you can be. So let me pull up some examples here. I'm actually going to read off. I still ask these questions. I've been asking them for years, but they're the most powerful questions you can ask in an interview round. And I sometimes modify these based on who my audience is. If I'm interviewing with a hiring manager, I might deliver these a little bit different than if I were speaking with a VP of sales or a CRO or a founder or an investor. I might phrase these just slightly different. But let's go through a couple of questions that are super powerful that you can ask that are going to make you stand out. So my favorite one, here it is. It's, looking back a year from now, how will I know that I've been successful in this role? And I always put beyond just quota achievement. That's table stakes. Of course, you're interviewing for a sales role. There's going to be revenue targets or pipeline targets associated with that role. But ask the hiring manager, ask the VP of sales, ask the CRO, what does success look like a year from now? And sometimes I even turn this into sort of a narrative or a story. I'll say something like, a year from now, we're at President's Club and we're sipping on some beers and we're having a conversation. But it's a really powerful question because it shows a couple things. One, you're in it for the long haul, at least for a year. You could ask, 5 years from now, how will I know I've been successful? But I think a year is pretty powerful. You're showing that you're thinking somewhat long-term. You're looking ahead a year, and you're asking, besides quota achievement, what other things will I have done that will have made me successful at this company? It's a super powerful question. And by the way, if a hiring manager or a sales executive or a founder doesn't have a strong answer for this, it can also be a yellow or maybe even a red flag that they don't have their shit together. And you might not want to be part of a company that can't think a year ahead and map out what success looks like. Because if they can't, it means that maybe no one's achieved that. And it means you might go there and struggle yourself and be unemployed again in 6 months. And you don't want that. So ask that question. I'll repeat it again here. But if you want copies of these questions, just reach out. I'm happy to share these. I've posted them on LinkedIn before, but LinkedIn, it's noisy. So if you missed them, reach out. I'll send these questions your way. Looking back a year from now, how will I know I've been successful? My all-time favorite question. I ask it in every round, whether that's hiring manager, investor, founder, I ask it. You can always ask the standard questions like what percentage of the team is pacing against quota. You should be asking those and trying to get an idea of what the team looks like. It's not my favorite question. The next one on my list of must-ask questions is, who are the top performers on the team and what makes them successful? You should be asking some flavor of this question in almost every round, if not every round of the interview process. And the reason for that is it shows that you're already you're already thinking about reverse engineering what's successful there. And I've never had really a bad answer to this. I can't think of a single interview I've been in where someone couldn't answer this. Usually the team knows who the top performer is. And what's great is you can then go connect with that person on LinkedIn, shoot them a DM and say, hey, heard you're the top guy or gal at such and such company. Heard all about this and that. Looking forward to working with you. And now you're starting to build new threads into the process, right? You're building a thread to the highest performing person on the team. You're showing that you're thinking ahead. You're wanting to reflect whatever qualities or attributes this top performer has as soon as you hit the ground in the new role. So here's the question again: who are the top performers on the team and what makes them successful? Really listen too, because if you get a vague answer, then it could also be a red flag that they don't know what success looks like, or they don't know who's successful, or no one's successful, right? So be very careful in asking that and pay very close attention to the response. Here's another one that I really like that I've been asking recently and had coaching clients ask recently is, in my first week of the new role, who outside of the sales organization should I make a point to connect with? So I'll repeat it again. In the first week of my new role, who should I connect with outside of the sales organization? Leadership loves this question because it shows that you realize strategically and from a self-awareness standpoint, again, executive presence, you realize that you're part of a system. Joining a company, you're not a lone wolf. You're part of a team that needs to sell a specific amount of revenue so they can grow the company and make it profitable and wildly successful. And so if you're asking, how can I start to connect with people, not just other sellers, not just sales enablement, not just sales leadership? I want to connect with engineering. I want to connect with the implementation team. I want to connect with marketing, because these are all functions that work together with sales to make a company successful. And if you show that you can be a true owner in the company and really, think about how to use other stakeholders in the business to close your deals and win revenue, it's a huge green flag for a hiring manager. It's just showing that you're thinking way outside of the box. And I always love the answers because people always have great answers for this. Oh, so-and-so over in engineering is a shaker and mover. You've got to go connect with that person. So-and-so on the marketing team has revolutionized our top of funnel. You will definitely want to get 30 minutes with that person in your first couple weeks. So then you go and actually do this. When you get in the role, you have a whole bunch of people to go connect with. All of these people end up becoming advocates of you. They want you to win. They want you to be successful. And what you'll find is they'll lend themselves to your deals to help you get there. It's an amazing thing. And it also helps build your network. Back to my earlier comments, your network is everything. Your network's going to help you find your next job and your next job and your next job. So the more you can do this and put yourself outside of the sales org and start to collaborate with the other parts of the business, and asking that question shows that. And leaders pick up on it very quickly, and it's super powerful. And then usually I ask some form of closing question, hey, based on this conversation, are you comfortable moving me on to the next round of the interview process? You should be asking some form of that. That's probably the most polite way to ask it. Is, what were your thoughts on this conversation? And are you comfortable moving me on to the next round of the interview? So those are some questions you can ask during the interview that are going to show that you have intellectual curiosity, you're self-aware, you're thinking in terms of systems, you're thinking in terms of growth of the company, and you're an owner. You're an owner in the process, and you're going to take ownership of your role and do the best you can to deliver results. Another idea that I'll throw out here that I've talked about a lot is when I'm preparing for an interview, I'll go through and watch every video on the company's YouTube channel or their Vimeo channel, whatever they have, or TikTok, it doesn't matter. But I just go and listen. I'll listen to podcasts, webinars, I'll read white papers. I just try to start to absorb the language that they use about their customers, about their product. And that lingo will start to come out in your interview conversations, especially if you can reference maybe a specific case study that you read about a customer, or if you can reference a specific product or feature that's part of the core offering of the company you're interviewing at. It'll just show that you've done a ton of research, that you've started to think in terms of how they view the world, and that's a really powerful signal to a hiring manager. After that, I'm a big fan of following up with a very short but thoughtful email. I actually heard recently someone say that you shouldn't send a thank you note after an interview round. That's bullshit. I always send them whenever I can. I used to send handwritten notes with The post-pandemic remote work world, that's a lot harder to do now because people are distributed. They're not in a centralized headquarters. But if you are interviewing for an on-site role or an in-person role, I would really try to track down the address. The corporate address shouldn't be hard to find. You're a salesperson. You know where to find addresses and phone numbers. Go track down the company's headquarters. Write a thank you note on a card and mail it, and try to, brush mail it if you need to, if it's a tight process. But usually it'll get there in a couple days, and it will go a really long way. It just shows that extra step that's going to help you stand out against any other candidate. 99% of candidates are not going to write a handwritten note to a VP of sales and say, thanks for taking time, or, appreciate the consideration for this role, and I'm excited to get started. So if you can do that, you're going to really set yourself apart. Let's see. One of the things I've talked about a lot is how you dress. A lot of us think that because we're in tech or because we're in a remote first world these days, that it's okay to show up in, a t-shirt. I hope that's not the case for most of you listening, but you can't show up in a t-shirt or, a black t-shirt, a gray t-shirt, even though that's what I wear a lot of the time. For an interview, that's just it's not okay, right? You need to dress well. And I tend to wear a suit coat with a collared shirt, even for a Zoom interview, for every round, whether I'm talking to the recruiter or talking to the founder or the investors. I dress for the occasion. I even put on, my nicest watch. I'll do everything I can to make sure my hair looks good. As part of that too, which is a funny thing in this remote work world that we live in, you also need to make sure your camera looks good, your audio sounds good, your background's not cluttered. You really need to take the extra effort to set the ambiance or set the stage for the conversation. And that means, again, investing maybe in a Logitech camera. I use one from Razer. I love it. That's a little bit above and beyond the Call of Duty, but just getting maybe an upgraded camera for your laptop and an upgraded microphone. You can usually find those things for less than $100 on Amazon. So I would highly recommend just making a small investment in your video quality, your audio quality, the background of your video, and then of course your appearance, whatever you need to do there. So these are all really small things, but again, back to that executive presence. You want to come across on a Zoom call as very in control, very consistent, and able to show up and deliver an amazing presentation. As part of that too, I always recommend people reset their Wi-Fi networks before a big interview round. So if you're going to jump on with a CRO in a couple hours, you might want to reset your router and make sure your network speeds are all up, because the last thing you want in the middle of an interview is to have your video suddenly lag and then you have to drop off and come back on. It's just going to kill the momentum in the conversation. So do everything you can. I even have a hotspot ready to go. So if my Wi-Fi crashes, I toggle my hotspot on and I'm right back in the conversation without, more than 30 seconds elapsing. So try to do that. Plan ahead. Get your settings all dialed in. Get your ambiance right. Get your appearance dialed in. And then, make sure all those other controllables are factored in and in place. Let's see. I'm just trying to think through a few other ideas here that I've given people. I've got a list actually. Let me go to this list here. Okay, something else that I do that I think is kind of interesting, and I know a lot of other people do this too, but this will help, is when you're in between rounds of the interview process, so maybe you talked to the hiring manager last week, and this week you're speaking with the VP of sales, and then next week the CRO, I always drip content over to the hiring manager during those lagging periods, those weeks. And by the way, this is the same thing I do in enterprise deal cycles. If a couple of weeks go by, or if a week goes by between next steps, I try to share something valuable with the prospect. And so I do the same thing in the hiring round. The best thing that I've done is I'll go find maybe an article about a competitor, or maybe a target account that the company has. I'll go and look for some press clippings or something around that account. So, if the company's prospecting Home Depot or Visa or something like that, I'll go find some headlines around those that might be relevant to the team, and I'll share those with the hiring manager. So just keep sending over valuable content. Be thoughtful about it. Don't bombard anybody with a bunch of junk, but go and do some research about a topic that might add value to the hiring manager and send that over in between rounds. It will really go a long way, and it just, again, shows that you're invested, that you're fighting for the role, and that you're really engaged in the process itself. Let's see. Okay, one other thing here that I think is a really interesting one, and I've done this now a handful of times. If you have one, offer a customer reference. Everybody offers an employer reference. Most people have that great manager that will write a really good review or that will jump on the phone and be a reference for you in an interview round. Not very many reps actually offer a customer up for a conversation. And again, if you're in the 99th percentile, you're the top 1% of reps, you have a good customer that you can introduce to the hiring manager and say, hey, why don't you talk to one of these customers that I've done a deal with? They'll spend 10, 15, 20 minutes with you and just share some insights around the project we worked on together. I realize this is hard to do, especially if you're earlier on in your career, but start to think ahead now. If you've got someone that you've sold to that you have a good relationship with, send them a message and ask if they'd be willing to be a reference for you, because it will go a really long way. I mean, there's no better proof that you know what you're doing than your hiring manager calls someone that you've sold to in the past and they have nice things to say about that project or that deal cycle. So those are a few ideas of how you can really stand out. And these are things that I really encourage you to do if you're interviewing right now, because again, it's very competitive out there. The bar is especially high for candidates right now. And so you've got to do everything you can to try to control the uncontrollables. And I realize that, you ultimately have no control over the decision-making process, but doing some of these things will just showcase your value. It'll showcase that you're someone who's self-aware, curious, and has some executive presence. So hope this helps someone out there. If you're interested in working with me one-on-one, again, I'll plug my coaching one more time because I'm super proud of this. It's one of my favorite parts about doing the show is the fact that I get to work one-on-one with people who tune into the show and who are going out for their next role. And how it works is we basically spend an hour together. I walk you through some materials that I have that are going to help you prepare for the interview, document your personal sales process, and then I coach you through how to deliver that. And then we go even beyond that. We go into the offer negotiation. My calling card is that I always help my clients negotiate a signing bonus, which is something that I'm very passionate about and I've talked about on other episodes. But if you're interested, hit me up. I'd love to talk to you and we can go through this all together. Take care out there, everyone, and thanks for listening.